In the ancient Genesis stories, our species was created in the image of God to reflect God's character faithfully in the world, both to our fellow creatures and to one another. Soon, though, we wanted to be little gods ourselves. We wanted to judge good and evil for ourselves, to decide who would live and who would die, who would rule and who would be enslaved. Consumed by the desire to grasp what others had, we became rivals of God and our neighbors. That crisis of desire has led to great shame, pain, suffering, violence, counterviolence, and fear in our lives, our communities, and our world. Today's headlines tell the same story in 100 different ways. In the Genesis story, the descendants of Cain, the first murderer, started building cities, and those cities reflected the violence of Cain. As city-states competed with each other and defeated one another, the winners created growing empires that elevated a few to godlike status and reduced most to oppression and slavery. The situation became so unbearable that in the story of Noah and the flood, God felt sorry for making the world in the first place. Eventually, God decided to wipe the whole slate clean and start again. Maybe Noah's descendants would do better than Adam's had. Although many people think of this as a cute story about animals and a boat ride, those who think more deeply find it deeply disturbing. The image of violent oppressors and innocent victims drowning together seems only to make a bad situation worse. At the very least, one would think God would have more creativity, moral finesse, and foresight than to create a good world only to destroy it because it went so bad so relatively quickly. Shouldn't God be better than this? To properly understand the story and others like it, we need to remember that ancient cultures were oral cultures. Few people were literate, and oral storytelling was to them what reading books, using the internet, going to concerts, and watching movies and TV shows are to us today. Ancient stories had a long life as oral compositions before they were ever written down. As oral compositions, stories could evolve over time. In a sense, writing them down ended their evolution. For ancient people in oral cultures, a story was like a hypothesis. A good and helpful story, like a tested hypothesis, would be repeated and improved and enhanced from place to place and generation to generation. Less helpful stories would be forgotten like a failed theory, or adjusted and revised until they became more helpful. Sometimes, competing stories would stand side by side like competing theories, awaiting a time when one would prevail, or both would fail, and a new story would arise with more explanatory power. In all these ways, storytelling was, like the scientific method, a way of seeking the truth, a way of grappling with profound questions, a way of passing on hard-won insights. As our ancestors deepened their understanding, their stories changed, just as our theories change. In this light, we can reconsider the story of Noah as an adaptation of even older stories from the Middle East. In one of those earlier versions, a gang of gods unleashed a catastrophic flood as a personal vendetta against some noisy people who kept the gods awake at night. Ancient Jewish storytellers would have found that story repulsive. So they adapted it to reveal more of God's true character, replacing many vindictive gods who are irritable from lack of sleep with one creator who unleashes a flood to flush out human violence. That's certainly a step in the right direction, but the process doesn't need to end with a Noah story. After all, God's violence doesn't really solve anything in the Noah story, since Noah's family quickly starts cooking up more trouble so that soon things are just as bad as they were before the flood. Again, we can't help but wonder, shouldn't God be better than that? To answer that question, we need to bring in another story. Later in Genesis, in the story of Joseph, God responds to violence in a very different way, not with more violence, but with kindness. Another big step in the right direction. We see the same pattern in the story of the Tower of Babel. The ancient world was